I caught my husband slipping out of my son's fiancée's dressing room an hour before the rehearsal dinner. I opened my mouth to call his name, then a shadow crossed the hallway. It was my son Daniel. His face didn't move, it hardened. "Mom," he whispered, "I already know. And it's worse." Hello friends. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Before I begin, would you tell me what city you're listening from? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where our little community gathers from. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of that day. I woke up at 4:47 a.m., too early for anything except worry. I told myself it was just rehearsal nerves. Mothers get those. I made tea I barely tasted and sat in my home office where the spreadsheets never lie. I run a tiny bookkeeping studio for local bakeries and florists. Nothing glamorous, but it covered Daniel's student loans when my husband's commissions came up short. The cells on my screen blurred. Some formulas that usually settle my mind just floated like gray clouds. Outside, Chicago was still asleep. In my head, though, the old conservatory was already alive for tonight's dinner. Cedar benches lined in two perfect rows, hurricane lanterns polished to a soft glow, eucalyptus garlands. I'd trimmed myself so not a single leaf drooped. It had to be right. My son deserved right. 22 years of marriage to Patrick. 20 years of mothering Daniel. I have been the calendar, the charger of dead phones, the finder of lost cufflinks, the one who remembers when everyone else forgets. Patrick has always been the voice people lean toward at parties. I am the list he never sees. The list that keeps the room standing. Lately the room didn't feel level. Conversations hushed when I walked in. His phone learned to tilt. When I asked, he fed me a soft joke and a softer kiss. "Just work, Lila." Big client circling back. "You don't trash 22 years because your stomach won't settle." That's what I told myself. The office door clicked. Daniel stood there in pajama pants and an ancient university hoodie, a coffee mug he didn't lift to drink. The circles under his eyes made him look 15 and 30 at once. "Mom, you've been up all night," he said. "The rehearsal's not until 7. I just want it to be beautiful." I tried. Closing the laptop like that would close the feeling too. He sat on the edge of my desk, picking at a nick in the wood from when he was 10 and swung his new baseball bat where he shouldn't have. "Dad left early," he said, voice careful. "Said he had to pick up a special thank you for Avery's parents." Avery. Bright, meticulous, the fiancée who color codes grocery lists and makes strangers feel like old friends. I liked her. The thought startled me. "Mom, can I ask you something?" The way he asked made the room smaller. "Anything." He studied the coffee's surface as if there were answers there. "Do you think Avery actually sees me? Not the job, not the apartment, not the plan, me." The question found a place under my ribs and pressed. Avery who knows which street vendor sells his favorite lamb skewers. Avery who texts me recipes for lemon bars she swears he'll love. Avery who has been meeting Patrick to pick a father's brain about investments lately. I reached for Daniel's hand, my steady boy with his father's jaw and my habit of double-checking locks. "Cold feet is normal," I said, and hated how false it sounded leaving my mouth. He nodded like someone giving you permission to lie. "Maybe." He slid off the desk. "I'm going to shower." When he left, I opened the laptop again and watched the cursor blink. The house hummed. A radiator clink, the soft whir of the fridge, the tiny noises a home makes when it thinks no one is listening. At 9:02 my phone buzzed. "Patrick. Running a quick errand, be back by 10. 2 minutes later, Avery's name lit up my screen. "Meeting Patrick to finalize the vendor tip envelopes. Back soon." 2 people, 1 errand. My stomach again. By noon, the conservatory coordinator texted to confirm the lighting test. I typed "all good." "Perfect," actually, then set the phone down and stood very still. Perfection is a fragile thing. Cracks first where you swore it wouldn't. I decided to go early, to check the lanterns. I told myself. 5 blocks from home, the sky opened, one of those brief Chicago showers that make the pavement smell like pennies. I jogged the last steps under the glass awning, pushed through the side door, and took the service corridor I know too well from too many vendor drop-offs. That's when I saw him. Coming out of the small bridal dressing room, tie loosened, hair wrong, eyes bright in a way I remembered from another lifetime. Behind him, the door hushed closed on a whisper of ivory fabric. I took in a breath that never made it to my lungs. His head turned, he saw me. For a heartbeat we were strangers. Then from the far end of the corridor a figure appeared, Daniel, his face set like winter. Mom, he said, voice low enough to not disturb the flowers. I already know. Pause. And it's worse. When I saw Daniel's eyes in that hallway, steady and unreadable, I realized something. My son had grown older in ways I hadn't noticed. He wasn't asking for my protection anymore. He was warning me. That morning blurred after he whispered those words. My hands shook as I adjusted the eucalyptus garland one more time. Perfection was impossible now, but I still went through the motions, the way a soldier might polish boots even when the war was already lost. Daniel moved quietly through the house, not his usual self. He had always hummed when he was nervous. Old TV themes, half songs from childhood. But that day, silence wrapped around him like armor. By 10 o'clock, Patrick was still out on errands. My phone showed me their names back to back like a pair of mocking twins. He said he was handling the envelopes. She said she was checking rentals. Both excuses sounded polished. Too polished. I forced myself to eat something, half a bagel I didn't taste. The house smelled faintly of lilies, Avery's favorite flower. She had insisted on them, and Patrick had nodded along, proud to help her source the best florist. Looking back, I should have noticed the way they both lit up when they agreed on details, as if wedding planning was their secret duet. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway then, holding his phone. He didn't hand it to me right away. He just looked at me, weighing whether I was ready. Finally he said, Mom. I didn't want to believe it. But I couldn't keep pretending. On the screen, a grainy photo filled the space. Patrick and Avery at a corner cafe 3 weeks ago. His hand brushed hers across the table. Not a father's hand. Not an innocent touch. I felt the room tilt. Maybe it's just friendly, I tried. But my voice betrayed me. Daniel shook his head. Look at the timestamp. He told you he was with a client that afternoon. Avery told me she was shopping with her cousin. They weren't careful. He swiped again. Another photo. The same 2 figures slipping out of a hotel downtown. Their faces half hidden, but his arm around her waist told the rest. My throat burned. 100 little moments crashed together. Their long mentoring sessions, her sudden interest in finance, his sudden energy after months of distance. I hired someone, Daniel admitted quietly. Not just one photo. A private investigator. That word hit me like a gavel. My son, driven to hire a detective against his own father. I wanted to scold him, to tell him it was reckless. But deep down I felt a flicker of relief. He hadn't imagined it. I hadn't either. There was proof now. Why didn't you tell me sooner? My voice cracked. Because, he said, staring hard at the floor, I needed to be sure. I needed rope. Enough rope for them to hang themselves. His words didn't sound like my boy. They sounded older, harder. And yet I understood. The rest of the day moved like a slow descent. Guests started to text about arrival times. The florist confirmed delivery. Patrick's voice drifted in through the door at last. Cheerful, polished, rehearsed. He smelled of cologne that wasn't mine, carrying gift bags that rattled with tissue paper. He kissed my cheek lightly, too lightly, and said, Perfect day, isn't it? I stared at him and thought, perfection is about to become ruin. Because now, thanks to Daniel's trembling hand holding those photos, we had our first weapon. The first crack in their story. And I knew in my bones, it wouldn't be the last. If you're still with me, thank you. Sometimes telling a story like this feels like pouring salt into my own wounds. But I promised myself, and I promised Daniel, that I would speak the truth. Slowly, carefully, and without flinching. After Daniel showed me those first photos, something in me cracked. Not all the way, not enough to break open, but just enough that every breath after carried a sharp edge. I spent the next hour moving through the house like a ghost, pretending I was checking final details, while my mind roared like a furnace. At noon, Patrick breezed back in. He carried 2 glossy shopping bags, designer ribbon curling out like smoke. He kissed my cheek as if nothing in the world was wrong. His smile was easy, rehearsed. Special thank you gifts for Avery's parents, he said. His eyes slid away from mine before the sentence was even finished. Daniel didn't say a word. He just watched his father set the bags down, watched the way Patrick's phone buzzed and how quickly he flipped it over so the screen faced the table. It was such a small gesture, but in that moment it felt like a gavel striking. Guilty. The rest of the afternoon crawled. Relatives texted me to confirm their flights had landed. The florist called about a delayed delivery of roses. I nodded, answered, smiled. My body moved through the checklist, but my soul wasn't there. At 3 o'clock, when the house finally emptied of vendors and noise, Daniel came to me again. He didn't speak right away. He simply placed a folded piece of paper on the table between us. His hands shook. I unfolded it. It was a hotel receipt. My husband's name was printed in sharp black ink. The date, 2 weeks ago. The time, a Tuesday afternoon when Patrick had sworn he was in Milwaukee for client meetings. And the room charges, room service for 2 champagne chocolate strawberries. My hands went cold. Maybe, I started, but the lie wouldn't come. There was no maybe. Daniel's jaw tightened. Mom, this isn't one mistake. This is who they are. I pressed the paper flat, though my vision blurred. For 22 years I had been the one to keep order, to file the receipts, to square the accounts. And now, right in front of me, a receipt told me my entire marriage was counterfeit. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I whispered. Because I didn't want it to be real, Daniel said. His voice broke on the last word. We sat in silence, 2 people staring at proof of a life collapsing. That was when I made a choice. Not to scream, not to throw the receipt at Patrick's face, not to run. I made the choice to wait. To watch. To let the lies build until they toppled themselves. Because Daniel was right. If I confronted Patrick now, he would smirk, spin a story, and turn me into the hysterical wife. And Avery? She would cry those glassy tears of hers and claim nerves, stress, pressure. They would twist the truth until even I doubted my eyes. But with proof, real, undeniable proof, there would be no escape. So I told my son, we don't stop them quietly. We stop them where everyone can see. He looked at me startled. At the rehearsal? At the wedding, I said, my voice steadying for the first time all day. In front of her parents, in front of our friends, in front of 300 witnesses. No more shadows. No more whispers. For a moment Daniel didn't speak. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, he nodded. His eyes were wet, but there was steel there too. Then we plan it right, he said. No mistakes. It was a strange, terrible moment. My son and I, allies in a war neither of us had asked for. We weren't planning a celebration anymore. We were planning an execution. Of lies, of betrayal, of a marriage that had died long before I admitted it. And when Patrick walked back into the room with his perfect smile and Avery called from the garden asking about table placements, I smiled back. I adjusted flowers. I played my part. But inside I was already writing the script for their downfall. And if you're wondering, yes, it was terrifying. But it was also the first time that day I felt something sharper than despair. I felt purpose. That night as I lay in bed next to Patrick, listening to his steady, careless breathing, I knew he believed he had won. He thought he had built his future piece by piece with her. He had no idea the walls were already shaking. The morning after Daniel showed me the receipt, I woke up with a different kind of energy. Not peace, no, that was gone, but focus. For years I had been the planner in our family. The one with checklists taped to the fridge. The one who made sure batteries in the smoke alarms were replaced. The one who could find an overdue bill before the bank even noticed. Patrick always teased me about it. Why, Lila? He would laugh. The general in slippers. Well, maybe being a general wasn't so bad. Because now I was planning a battle. Daniel and I sat in my office with the door closed. The same desk where I used to help him with algebra homework now held a hotel receipt and a folded photo of Patrick leaning far too close to Avery. They looked almost staged, too perfect in their betrayal. Daniel kept his arms crossed, his jaw tight. We can't just wave these around, he said. They'll say it's fake. I know, I said. We need more. Something that speaks louder than either of them. For a long moment he didn't answer. Then with a voice lower than I'd ever heard from him, he said, I already started. He unlocked his phone and slid it across the desk. There, in a hidden album, was a video. Not professional surveillance, not crisp but clear enough. Patrick and Avery standing too close outside a hotel entrance, her hand on his chest, his laugh soft and familiar. My stomach twisted. That laugh had once been mine. Daniel's voice shook. I wanted to give them enough rope, Mom. Now we have it. I reached out and touched his hand. It was cold but steady. You've been carrying this alone, I whispered. Not anymore. We talked then, not as mother and child but as 2 people staring down a war. We would let the wedding go forward, let every guest sit comfortably in their chairs, let the music play and the flowers glow. And then when all eyes were on them we would show the truth. It was brutal. It was cruel. But it was the only way they couldn't twist the story. The rest of that day I played my part. I adjusted place cards. I answered texts from relatives asking about parking. I even laughed at one of Patrick's jokes, though inside I was counting every second until his arrogance collapsed. But in the quiet moments, in the kitchen when the kettle boiled, in the hallway when I paused by the mirror, I rehearsed. What would I say? How would I stand? Would my voice hold steady when 300 people turned to look at me? And then late that evening, Daniel slipped back into my office. His face was pale, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He closed the door and sat across from me. "There's something else," he said. My heart lurched. "What do you mean?" He pulled out his phone again, but this time the screen wasn't photos or receipts. It was an email thread. The sender, Patrick. The subject line, transfer confirmation. Attached was a PDF. I opened it, my fingers trembling. A wire transfer, large, too large. And not to any vendor I recognized. The receiving account carried Avery's initials. Daniel's voice was flat. "He moved money, Mom. A lot of it. From your business account." I stared at the screen, the numbers swimming. It wasn't just love he was giving her. It was everything we had built. And that was when I knew, this wasn't only betrayal of the heart. This was theft. Which meant if we played this right, there would be more than humiliation waiting for them at the altar. There would be consequences. And as I looked at Daniel, his face hard but his eyes still my boy's, I whispered the words I never thought I'd say. "Then we'll destroy them in front of everyone." This is the part that lived in my head in 1,000 different ways for a week. The scene I both dreaded and craved. If you've ever planned something down to the napkin fold, you know how small details become giant stakes. The morning light was gentle as if the world itself wanted to be kind. It lied. I woke with my throat tight and my calendar of tiny tasks, flowers, seating, soundcheck, already mapped in a precise line in my mind. Daniel was quieter than a prayer. He moved through the house with the same care he'd always shown at my side, handing me pins and tape, adjusting cords with a patience that felt like penance. We met at the kitchen island and I looked at him. "You okay?" I asked, and he gave me a tiny smile that was mostly teeth. He's good at pretending he's fine, he learned that from me. "Yeah," he said. "Let's just get through this and then we can breathe." The venue team arrived early. The conservatory smelled of cut greens and lemon. Ushers in neat jackets rolled carts of linens. A man from AV set up the projector and ran a quick demo of my slideshow. Baby photos of Daniel, us at the lake. It was staged tenderness. It felt obscene. I checked the AV feed myself. Mara had left precise instructions. No one except Lila and AV lead may cue the slideshow. Remote is in Lila's bag. Any surprise must be approved. The coordinator nodded as if she had always known my name and my rules. That small, bureaucratic nod steadied me more than anything. At noon, our house filled with family who wore their best calm. My sister-in-law fussed over table settings, telling me again how lovely everything looked in a voice that sounded unbearably bright. I smiled and let her fuss because she needed the pretense of normal. In the corner, Aisha, the one person who can make a room shrink with a look, checked her watch, then slipped a small recorder into her pocket and a badge into her purse, though she'd promised she was just coming as my aunt. She was my aunt in appearances and a cop by training. She carried the authority that would later feel like an anchor. Guests trickled in, neighbors, college friends, co-workers of Patrick's who nodded and said the usual things about, "What a wonderful day," and "You must be so proud." My chest ached at the practiced kindness. Behind smiles, eyes always search for the seam where truth might peek out. Avery arrived in a quiet sweep, pearls at her throat, a practiced softness in her steps. She hugged me, too long, the way someone wraps themselves in another's fragrance to claim it. "Everything looks perfect, Lila," she breathed. She meant it the way a thief admires the lock she plans to open. I smiled, held it, and made a note to breathe after she left my side. Patrick was something else entirely, polished in a way only arrogance can teach. He flirted with guests, told a story that had nothing to do with the present, and at 3:45 he came to the side table where I had placed my clutch and said quietly, "You look beautiful." There was no warmth in it. It was a practiced line he expected to collect applause for later. I nodded and told him, "Thank you," and then felt foolish for caring if he meant it. Noon slid toward ceremony time. The caterers finished the last touches. The string quartet tuned their instruments like a small, stubborn flock. People began to seat themselves, microphones were tested again, and somewhere behind the glass a truck idled with its engine on. The town's gossip would tell a different story later about who left in a hurry. Mara and Aisha flitted through the crowd under the guise of greeting relatives. They were quiet as the undertow. Mara checked my bag and tapped the remote into my palm with a look that said everything. "This is your hand. Only you press it." Aisha gave Daniel a short, fierce nod that felt like permission to be cold. I sat in the front row, in the exact seat I'd practiced winter evenings with a phone between my hands and a list folded in the crease of my palm. Around me, people adjusted their coats and took photos with fingers that trembled only a little. The officiant, kind, small-voiced, smiled at us as if the world was exactly as it claimed to be. There was an odd domestic choreography to everything. Someone placing a napkin, someone adjusting a boutonniere, someone whispering about the weather as if that could ground a world gone untrue. I clung to choreography. It's what I know. It's how I used to manage the undone threads of our life. At 4:05 the procession began. The music filtered in like a tide. Daniel's face when he walked down the aisle was the face of a man who had learned to hold himself together from the inside out. For a sliced second I inhaled him. The boy who rode his bike on summer breaks, the teen who burned his first batch of lemon cookies, the man who'd become my co-conspirator in something that felt obscene and necessary. They exchanged vows. The words were soft and immediate and hollow. My fingers tightened into my purse. I could feel every breath the guests took like recorded evidence. And then the officiant said the line that had been my signal for months of rehearsal. "If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The old, quaint clause everyone smiles through. The pause hung. People glanced at one another, the polite kind of curiosity. The moment I had been waiting for and dreading had arrived. I rose. Not because I wanted to stop a wedding, though God knows I did, but because it was my time to turn the room into a courtroom where the truth would have no place to hide. My palm was sweating on the remote. Mara's face in the corner was a small black mask of encouragement. Aisha stood up behind me like a statue. "You'll think I'm mad," I said into the hush, but my voice carried. It had been braided with practice, with the cold arithmetic of evidence. But there are reasons. Heads turned. Gasps rustled like fragile paper. Patrick went white as linen. I pressed the remote. The slideshow that had been planned to show baby pictures of Daniel sprang to life. But the first image was not the carefree summer photograph I had chosen. The first image was a grainy hotel receipt, then another photograph, Patrick and Avery in the corner of a cafe, their hands too familiar across a table. A hush that was almost a physical thing fell over the guest. For a second, one small, bright second, everything held its breath. And then, in my ears, a sound I will never forget, the curious click of a phone camera. Someone had started to record. I didn't know then that a second, darker image was already waiting in the wings. A wire confirmation, a transfer scanned and time-stamped, something that would change the conversation from moral outrage to legal consequence. I didn't know because no one told me yet. Mara had more to show me. Aisha held a file under her jacket. Daniel's hand tightened at my elbow, the only touch that told me he was still there. The screen clicked to the next slide. But before it could fully bloom into the next proof, before the room could really form into either a jury or a mob, someone from the back cleared their throat and called my name. "Lila," a voice asked. It was soft, but it carried the worry of someone who has spent a life trusting appearances. "Are you sure about this?" My breath hitched. Milo, the officiant, looked at me as if I might unravel into a scene. Patrick's mouth opened and closed. Avery's eyes were sharp, pupils pinpricks of fear or fury, I could not tell which. My thumb hovered over the remote for what felt like a long time, long enough for the whole world to rearrange itself around one choice. The air tasted like metal and roses. My family, our friends, the people who had come to celebrate. Every face was a mirror that could reflect me back as mad or righteous, broken or brave. I pressed the button. The next slide filled the screen. This time it wasn't a photograph. It was a printout of a wire transfer confirmation. The sender, my business account, amount, the recipient's name, Avery Martin, and a date. The numbers were painfully precise, obscene in their implication. The hush deepened. Someone shifted, a stage whisper of a question beginning to form then swallowed. I read the words slowly into the silence the way a judge reads a verdict. "This transfer moved last month," I said, and my voice, thin as it was, cut like a blade. "From a business account in my name to an account connected to Avery Martin. That money should have been our reserve." Faces crumpled. Someone near me gasped. Someone else covered their mouth with both hands. Patrick's smile cracked, a hairline fracture that widened with every second. He looked at me as if suddenly the room held a grammar he had never learned to speak. Mara's hand found my knee and gave it a small, grounding squeeze. Aisha stood, already half in motion, the badge inside her purse a cold weight. Daniel's arm tightened around my shoulder. I felt the anchor of them both and the strange vertigo of being both accused and accuser under the same roof. Patrick's lips moved. "This is ridiculous," he said. This is a misunderstanding." "Is it?" I said. "Because there's more." I tapped the remote again. A sequence of images began. Hotel folios, a cafe photo, the wire, and then a final page that made my hands go numb. A notary sheet. My name. A signature that looked like mine at a glance, but when you held it beside a tax return you could see the tremor in the loop that wasn't mine, the flourish. I never used. The witness line listed a familiar name. Patrick Mendel. There was a sharp sound. Someone's silverware knocked a plate. A child began to cry at the end of the row. The murmurs broke into a concrete sound. Questions. People I had laughed with for years were looking at me the way you look at a painting and suddenly realize the frame is crooked and the paint cracked. Patrick stood up as if to block the screen. "Lila, this is fake. You're showing doctored images. You're making a..." He stopped because Mara's voice cut clean across the rows like a bell. "Doctored," she said, voice level. "Let me see those documents." She stepped forward and the gentility of the room folded back like paper. She cradled the printouts the way she used to cradle balance sheets and then, without drama, she began to read them aloud. Timestamps, IP logs, bank confirmation numbers. She read not like a woman in a coffee shop but like someone trained to unpick lies. At that exact moment, I noticed a movement at the edge of the crowd. Two men in plain clothes, polite and deliberate. They walked directly to the officiant and showed him a card. The officiant's face changed minutely, a shift like the ocean changing tide. He stepped back. I caught Aisha's glance and the small, almost imperceptible nod that said every word she could not. Then a voice that was oddly small in all that noise. "Madam, we need to speak with you." Two officers were at Avery's side. Her mother shrank forward like a paper doll being folded. Avery's face, pale as the dress, flushed and then crumbled into tears that were no longer theatrical. They were ragged, genuine, battered by the sudden collapse. "On what grounds?" Patrick demanded, moving toward the officers as if his position might physically change the facts. He reached for a phone, then thought better of it when a uniformed officer looked at him with an expression that did not invite argument. The officer opened a small folder and spoke with the kind of calm that always scares me. "There's reason to believe there's been embezzlement and financial fraud. We need to take a statement and secure some documents." Avery literally staggered back. Her mother clutched her arm and asked in a voice that was half protest and half implosion, "What is she saying? What did she do?" Patrick's face had turned a color I'd only ever seen once before. The sick green that comes before nausea. For a second he looked like the man I married. The frightened, ordinary man, before the old mask of charm slammed back into place in a desperate attempt to protect him. "This is a mistake," he barked. "This is a setup. Lila, you've gone too far." "Far enough," I said, though a small part of me wanted to laugh at how little this man understood what it meant to destroy what we had built. Mara handed the printouts to one of the officers. "Chain of custody is intact," she said. "I can provide digital copies and the forensic trail." The officer nodded, took the documents and turned back to Avery. "We have probable cause," he said softly. There was a scramble more private and precise than I had imagined. Someone took Avery's phone. The photographers, those hired to make the day immortal, kept snapping. Their flashes produced a staccato of light that looked like broken stars. People recorded everything on their phones. Someone screamed. Someone else prayed. My chest felt as though someone had tied a rope around it and was slowly pulling. Patrick tried to reach me. He placed both hands on my shoulders. His touch was slick with panic. "Lila, listen to me," he said. "We can fix this. Tell them it's not what it looks like." His words were ragged, like someone begging a storm to pass. But the room had become something else. Evidence sits heavy. It calls to reason and to the law. In front of everyone, 3 people who had worked in silence, Mara, Aisha, Daniel, had arranged the facts into a net. The net fell and the catch made a sound like a bell. An officer escorted Avery, hands in front of her like someone moving through hot water. Her mother followed, sobbing. Patrick, for a long beat, simply stood there, the breath gone out of him. Then he did the only thing a cornered man with a name to save does. He fled. He pushed past guests, boots on the stone, knocking a lantern off a table as he went. Someone shouted, someone else chased, but he was already gone, swallowed by the hedges and the dark that waits behind cultivated lawns. Later they would tell me he drove like a man possessed, past the lake through stop signs until a neighbor called the police on a disturbance. For that first moment in the garden, though, I only felt the echo of his feet and the low hum of 30 phones recording what the family could not bear to witness. When the officers finished taking statements, the room dispersed like a paper cut, edges curled in. People wanted distance from scandal. People wanted to say they had been wronged. The photographer kept shooting. The caterers packed quietly. The music, which had once planned to pull us together, was now the soundtrack to something being dismantled. Daniel held me then. He smelled of pressed linen and something like regret. "We did it," he said. He should have sounded triumphant, but his voice was hollowed out. "We did what we had to." "Yes," I said, and I meant it, and I didn't. "We did what we had to." The hours after were a blur of forms and officers' questions, of a neighbor bringing me a mug of tea and then asking, with the most awkward tenderness, if I was okay. I wasn't. But I was standing. Mara arranged for copies to be sent to the district attorney. Aisha took statements with the efficiency of someone who has watched justice happen and fail 100 times and still believed stubbornly in procedure. The next morning the headlines were merciless and precise. "Engagement ends in scandal. Business owner exposes embezzlement," read one. "Groom's father flees after allegations surface at wedding," read another. My phone lit up with messages from old clients, some angry, some supportive, a few asking for privacy. The tax clients who had trusted me for years called to check if they needed to switch accountants. My studio, my small life's work, found itself scanned by the same public eye that had watched the garden fall apart. Patrick's name trended for 2 days. Avery was charged with fraud and faced arraignment. She would later accept a plea to lesser charges. The bank froze the suspect transfers and opened an internal investigation into forged signatures. Forensics would show the forgeries and the device fingerprints. The DA would thank Mara and Aisha with a curt, professional nod. The legal process, slow and meticulous, began to spool. But it wasn't only the legal things that mattered. The private, quiet injuries required tending. My sister called at odd hours and cried with me. A former client sent flowers and a note. Sometimes truth is the only clean thing left. Daniel slept in my office for 2 nights, his head on my desk, catching sleep in short, tremulous bursts. We ate sandwiches and spoke in small facts about bank freezes and court dates as if by cataloging the world we could make it less treacherous. And in the middle of that rubble an odd and bright thing took root. People I'd once taken for granted, neighbors, clients, some who had been strangers turned friends, brought casseroles, offered to let me use office space, texted links to legal aid. The world has a way of showing its colors when the paint peels, and some of those colors were kinder than I'd expected. A week later, I sat in a quiet attorney's office and signed papers that would become the beginning of the end of what I had once assumed would last forever. The papers were calm, legal, tidy. Divorce. Separation of assets. Restitution clauses. The procedural language had a finality to it that felt almost merciful. It named what had happened, and in naming, it began to make it real in a way I could pursue. Later, in moments between phone calls and court dates, I would find myself remembering trivial things. The way Daniel chewed at his thumbnail when nervous, the sound of Patrick's laugh in better days. Memory is a strange, stubborn animal. Keeps what it wants to keep. Daniel held me then. He smelled of pressed linen and something like regret. "We did it," he said. He should have sounded triumphant, but his voice was hollowed out. "We did what we had to." "Yes," I said, and I meant it, and I didn't. We did what we had to. The hours after were a blur of forms and officers' questions, of a neighbor bringing me a mug of tea and then asking, with the most awkward tenderness, if I was okay. I wasn't. But I was standing. Mara arranged for copies to be sent to the district attorney. Aisha took statements with the efficiency of someone who has watched justice happen and fail 100 times and still believed stubbornly in procedure. The next morning the headlines were merciless and precise. Engagement ends in scandal. Business owner exposes embezzlement, read one. Groom's father flees after allegations surface at wedding, read another. My phone lit up with messages from old clients, some angry, some supportive, a few asking for privacy. The tax clients who had trusted me for years called to check if they needed to switch accountants. My studio, my small life's work, found itself scanned by the same public eye that had watched the garden fall apart. Patrick's name trended for 2 days. Avery was charged with fraud and faced arraignment. She would later accept a plea to lesser charges. The bank froze the suspect transfers and opened an internal investigation into forged signatures. Forensics would show the forgeries and the device fingerprints. The DA would thank Mara and Aisha with a curt, professional nod. The legal process, slow and meticulous, began to spool. But it wasn't only the legal things that mattered. The private, quiet injuries required tending. My sister called at odd hours and cried with me. A former client sent flowers and a note. Sometimes truth is the only clean thing left. Daniel slept in my office for 2 nights, his head on my desk, catching sleep in short, tremulous bursts. We ate sandwiches and spoke in small facts about bank freezes and court dates, as if by cataloging the world we could make it less treacherous. And in the middle of that rubble an odd and bright thing took root. People I'd once taken for granted, neighbors, clients, some who had been strangers turned friends, brought casseroles, offered to let me use office space, texted links to legal aid. The world has a way of showing its colors when the paint peels, and some of those colors were kinder than I'd expected. A week later, I sat in a quiet attorney's office and signed papers that would become the beginning of the end of what I had once assumed would last forever. The papers were calm, legal, tidy. Divorce. Separation of assets. Restitution clauses. The procedural language had a finality to it that felt almost merciful. It named what had happened, and in naming, it began to make it real in a way I could pursue. Later, in moments between phone calls and court dates, I would find myself remembering trivial things. The way Daniel chewed at his thumbnail when nervous, the sound of Patrick's laugh in better days. Memory is a strange, stubborn animal. Keeps what it wants to keep.